All right. So welcome everybody to the final TILE seminar in the academic year. Today we have Daisy Abbott with us. She's an interdisciplinary researcher and research developer. Her current research focuses on game-based learning, serious games, 3D visualization, and issues surrounding digital interactions in the arts and humanities. In particular, she is investigating the use of games to teach academic and research skills in higher education. Daisy is a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy and a certified leading practitioner of learning development. She is a peer reviewer for a range of serious game journals, a judge for the GALA. So sorry, you have to tell me what that is. I did not look that one up.
Games and Learning Alliance.
Right, serious games competition, and has been a reviewer for both the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. Today, she's going to talk about game-based learning for research skills in education, and I'm going to hand over. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Okay, so you should all now be able to see my screen. Let me know if you can't.
Yes.
So thank you for joining me today and enjoying a bit of Nightworks if you were here for the music beforehand. So I'm going to focus today on my research into game-based learning into research skills for higher education. So I'm going to try and spend not much more than half an hour talking about some of the theory and the underlying research, including why we teach research skills and how they are as a subject, and then why I think that game-based learning is quite a good approach to kind of revitalize the teaching of research skills. And then we're going to have a more practical bit where I share lots of different games with you, and then some questions and discussion at the end. Okay, so why do we teach research skills at universities? I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but they develop essential capabilities. They're very important for transitions from undergrad to postgrad and also from postgrad into the workplace. And they are pretty ubiquitous. I can't think of a single university that doesn't have some kind of research skills provision. But research skills are really boring. At least this is what the literature tells us. So the literature identifies that research skills as courses are less, they have less satisfaction for students than subject-based courses. The literature talks about students underperforming, about students lacking the motivation to study research skills, and the need for active approaches to kind of make these skills relevant and exciting for the students to learn alongside and to complement their subject-based teaching. Okay, what else? So what we know about research skills is that they are mostly at these higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. If you've never seen Bloom's taxonomy before, don't worry about it. But they're not shallow learning. Basically, they're deep learning. They are quite metacognitive a lot of the time, and this means that they're actually harder to teach and harder to learn than many other skills that we might teach at universities. So with that out of the way, let's have a quick look at some definitions so that we're all on the same page as I talk about the theory as we go through this talk. So games versus gamification. I talk about game-based learning, and this is when, whilst you are playing a game, you learn something. And specifically, we quite often design games deliberately for learning. So that is game-based learning. The picture below there, the little picture here. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse cursor, but that is my favorite example of game-based learning. It's an app for kids called Dragon Box, which teaches all different kinds of maths, and it's really brilliantly designed game-based learning. Gamification, on the other hand, it's a misused term. It's widely misused. People sometimes say gamification when they mean games. What gamification is, it's a layering of game mechanics on top of an activity that does not itself change. So here we have Duolingo, if you recognize those. Duolingo has all sorts of gamification, badges, leaderboards, reminders, appointment-based mechanics, all of these things. But basically, you're still learning a language. You're still looking at the text and learning a language. And the picture underneath that is zombies run. So when I go out running, I like to run away from zombies through an audio game, but I'm still running. I'm not playing a game, I'm still running. Now, if you learn nothing else from this talk, it's that game-based learning and gamification are not the same thing. Okay, and I might use the phrase game mechanics to talk about the interaction systems. So the things that we design into games that guide gameplay. And these can provide things like feedback, they can provide structure. For instance, you go to level 2, everything gets a bit harder. They can also provide rewards or penalties. And as we know, rewards and penalties are linked to kind of psychology, dopamine and motivation and all that much more complicated stuff. And games also offer meaningful choice or agency, player agency, which can lead to self-efficacy. My position is that game mechanics, it is absolutely crucial that we start with the learning mechanics and then we design game mechanics that deliver those learning mechanics. So learning mechanics just means the exact same thing, but in learning, you know, the way you design your instruction is learning mechanics. How do we translate those into game mechanics? So if I say mechanics, I basically mean these little interaction systems that we have. So a 30-second breather for me, and I'd just like you to take 30 seconds just to note down any immediate thoughts for the discussion later about this topic. Then I fear silence, so that probably wasn't 30 seconds, but okay. So let's talk in detail now about game-based learning. So game-based learning, or GBL, is inherently constructivist. And what I mean by this, if you're not familiar with the term, constructivism is a framework or a methodology from teaching research, from pedagogical research, which means that the learners construct meanings for themselves. They don't just sit there passively listening and absorbing knowledge, they are active participants in it. So games have to be constructivist because they are inherently participatory. Games are personal as well. You know, an individual or a team will make decisions about the game. They will bring different things to it. Games rely on those decisions to move forward. So the agency of the player is very instrumental in moving the game forward. And this gives a sense of autonomy and power, if you like, over the game. GBL for children, there's absolutely tons and tons of research on this, and it's less well researched in higher education, but this is a rapidly changing situation, as I'm sure a few of the people whose names I've seen in the room can tell you as well. So interest is really increasing in how we can usefully leverage game-based learning for adults as well as children. And as you'll see later, my focus is leveraging game-based learning, not just for the kind of lower levels of learning that we see in Bloom's taxonomy, but for research skills, for these high-level metacognitive learning outcomes that are actually much harder to teach. So in one sentence, it's really difficult to summarize the literature on game-based learning in higher education, but in one sentence, the literature thinks that it is a promising pedagogical approach, provided that it is well designed and that it fits well within the practitioner context. And that goes in terms of the actual educational format, but also the policy, the different attitudes that adult learners have, and all that kind of wider context of higher education. And the literature also identifies that there are still significant barriers, primarily a lack of time, workloads in lecturers, and a lack of confidence that people can do it well. So, what is the rationale then for using game-based learning for research skills and for these higher order learning outcomes? So I've done a little Venn diagram here. I would propose that the two topics, games and research skills, doing independent research, share these characteristics. They are both very active things to do. They both are empowering, as in you make decisions and you then see the results of your decisions straight away. Both of them have to involve some level of critical thinking, of weighing up options, of strategizing, and managing your resources, whether that's artificial game resources that have been designed, or whether that's your resources as an individual doing a research project. They both rely very much on the autonomy of the researcher or the player, so they're very self-driven. Both of them can be social, but are maybe not necessarily social. And I'd also argue that both are highly creative activities. And I just want to say one thing about play in general in terms of adult learning, andragogy and hoitagogy, as opposed to just the delivery of knowledge. So playful learning is a growing area of interest in higher education, and it is highly rigorous. And anyone who hasn't come across the amazing wealth of scholarship that there is on playful learning in higher education, I encourage you to join the Playful Learning Association. They do a conference every year. They're a really, really delightful community of people. It's hard for me to frame this because I don't know how experienced you all are with playful learning, but just to summarize some of the benefits. Play can inform, it is engaging, or it can be engaging, but it can also be persuasive and influential. A huge advantage of play is that it creates safe spaces. And we see this a lot across the literature, that there are these kind of safe spaces or experimental spaces where students aren't being graded and they feel that it's okay to do something a bit risky and potentially fail. Play also facilitates exploration, social interactions, resilience in some cases, and it can increase motivation and it can stimulate creativity. So there's a lovely book by the Playful Learning Association, which I can share with you later if anyone wants to know more about the wider field of play as opposed to just games. Okay, so obviously, I think that game-based learning for research skills is a very fruitful pedagogical approach. Does anyone else agree with me? And I'm now going to just take you through a survey that I did last year where I looked at, it's a decent sample size, nearly 100 people who have some sort of responsibility for teaching research in higher education. Maybe some of you filled in my survey. If so, thank you. And there's a paper linked here, and I'll share all the links at the end, of course. So firstly, the thing about research skills is that provision is very, very complex. It looks completely different in different universities, and it's not centralized in the way that you think it might be. Some aspects are, other aspects are sort of plugged on by different courses or different programs. It's very complex, it's very dispersed in terms of how we teach students how to do research. It doesn't always come from the same place. And the focus tends to be on postgrad and staff, so early career researchers. Very few of the respondents to this survey noted specifically research skills provision for undergraduates. take from that what you will. Okay, did people agree that game-based approaches would be a helpful complement in research skills training? Yes, overwhelmingly they did. So 88% said, yes, I agree with that statement. Only 3% said no. Don't worry about the whole diagram. I'll just summarize for you. So I did some thematic analysis, and the sort of key takeaways from the survey were that people thought game-based learning was engaging, novel, fun, or interesting. And I thought this was quite interesting because the keywords here are mostly focusing on the emotional affect of playing games rather than the efficiency of their teaching. Lots of people did also talk about the impact on teaching, you know, the idea that game-based learning might make something more memorable. But actually most of those keywords were about the emotional response of students to it. And then there was another interesting category, which is innovation, which is the idea of innovative teaching methods being more appropriate for teaching some innovative subjects. So that came through a little bit as well. And then just here's a summary of the thematic analysis. So just general positive comments. Lots of people identified, well, 10 people identified that it was good for experiential learning by, you know, literally placing the student in a realistic scenario. So experiential learning, and that it can support diverse learning styles. It can enhance collaboration. However, some downsides, it's difficult to resource. It can be a hard sell for students who are like, I'm not a child, why am I playing a game? And it can remove the fear of failure that some students have. What's really clear from this whole survey is that there is not one magic bullet, one amazing game design that will fulfill all of our needs. It is not one size fits all. And even for one subject, it's not one size fits all because learners are all different. So that came across very strongly. I'm going to take a short diversion into games and diversity. I'm not going to talk in much detail about this, but as we know, lots of our learners are neurodivergent, and even people who are neurotypical learn in different ways. I covered personalization in my survey, so I thought I would just go across it here. So personalization of learning is really recommended, and it's particularly recommended for inclusive teaching and neurodiversity affirming practice. And it benefits the whole cohort, not just the people who aren't currently being served by our teaching methods. So people agreed that personalization when teaching research skills is very important. People also agreed that game-based learning is very good for personalization because the decisions made by a player can kind of tailor the content that they receive through game-based methods. However, again, here at the top of this graph is the point that it can't be a one size fits all. You have to offer a suite, a smorgasbord of different types of learning so that you suit most people over the duration of the course. Can game-based approaches help researchers to learn research skills in a personalized way? Again, we have strong agreement here, but it's not perhaps quite as definitive as with some of the other questions. Most people said somewhat helpful rather than very helpful. And then inclusivity. Again, you can see a big chunk here that lots of people think games are more inclusive. That's 29%, 17% about the same. And then the biggest group, 41%, said it depends on the game. And they're absolutely right. So games can be simultaneously more and less inclusive because they'll really suit some of your learners and really alienate others. Okay, and the main takeaway from whether games are considered by the students to be inclusive is that it depends on whether they're open to this approach in the first place. If people are happy to learn through games, they're brilliant at delivering, they can be brilliant at delivering the learning outcomes. If learners have a kind of resistance to it, then they could fall very flat. All right, so I'm doing okay for time. A quick case study then. So I created a quest to teach research skills, to test some of these ideas out. So research skills courses, again, we're talking about high-level functional learning outcomes, and they require a lot of self-efficacy from the learner. So how can we individualize and personalize research skills teaching to suit deeply different and diverse individuals? So I made this quest, that's just a glimpse of it there. It's an interactive learning tool. It's sort of a game. It's more of an interactive learning tool. It's a digital choose your own adventure using a software called Twine, which is for hypertext narratives. It's a sort of click here if you want to choose this, click here if you want to choose that. And the learners take on a quest through research skills, and every decision they make tailors the learning content that is then delivered to them. So if you have a very undeveloped project idea, it would give you the brainstorming tools, whereas if you already knew what you were doing, it might take you to the how to write a project brief section of the learning content. And it was a very light touch fictionalized. So yes, the characteristics of this sort of approach, it's highly exploratory, it's active, it relies on player choices, and it's very closely linked to their specific current idea. So it's not about somebody else's research project, it's about your research project. There was a bit of a silly kind of narrative layered on the top, and I used some gamification techniques like badges to see if it increased motivation. Did it work? Right, I'm going to take a short pause and play you a video. This paper is about the Creative Thinking Quest, a gamified tool that helps people design research or creative projects from initial brainstorming all the way through to writing a project brief. Oops. Research skills are known to be really hard to teach, and there is some evidence that quest-based approaches can help with personalising learning and learner autonomy. The study looks at user data to assess the impact of non-linear navigation, narrative, and digital badges on learning. Results show that the quest worked extremely well, but for a small minority of users. It also showed that the ability to personalise learning of research design skills through a quest format was extremely effective, but that the narrative and badges gamification elements were less successful. Overall, the paper provides valuable empirical data on an understudied area within gamification for learning. This paper... Okay, so the key findings are that the majority of people said that personalisation is either somewhat important or very important for learning research skills. The same proportion agreed that the quest was personalised for their needs. The quality of the learning content within the quest and this sort of choose your own adventure structure was highly praised by the people who assessed it. They felt that aspect of it was very successful, but the gamification elements weren't as successful. They were still more successful than not, but not worth the effort enough, I would say. And there's a link to a paper that I wrote on it there. So if we bring this back to diversity then, I would say that the higher level your learning outcomes are, the more towards the top of Bloom's taxonomy they are, the more important role self-efficacy, self-driven learning, learner agency plays. So in the postgraduate sphere, this is particularly important, and that's where I've focused most of my research. Other recommendations for diversity is that game-based approaches should be offered as a complement to, not a replacement for, whatever methods you're currently using to teach research skills, that there is no one size fits all. They can be both more inclusive and less inclusive, because what suits some will not suit others. And what came across really clearly in my research is that yes, it depends on the game and how you've designed the game, but sometimes people just won't like it because of their own personal preferences, and that's fine too. And then the last recommendation is that it's really quite hard to do game-based approaches well and with the limited resources that we all have. So you need a lot of care and a lot of skill to kind of choose the right bits of game-based approaches and to ignore the bits that are just going to cost you a lot of money and take up a load of time and not actually result in better learning outcomes. Whew, right. Again, a 30-second rest for me. And just please note down some things to ask me in a minute. Great. Okay. So I've actually galloped through all that so quickly that I've made up 5 minutes. So I'm delighted, but I can talk more about any aspect of the theory in the discussion section later. So just let me know if there's something you want me to go into more detail in. Right, on to the fun practical bit then. So I've collected some research-related games, and George, I know you're in the room. You will be delighted to know you're cited later on, but I will draw attention to that in a minute. So there are my games. I've talked to you already about the creative thinking quest, and I've got a second game called How to Fail Your Research Degree. These, to my knowledge, are the only games that look at research as a kind of holistic process. They're both quite wide in their scope. You know, one's about designing a research project right the way from brainstorming all the way through to writing the project brief and the risk analysis and that kind of thing. And the other one, How to Fail Your Research Degree, is like a fictionalized version of doing a research project. So if I'm wrong and there are others out there, please tell me about them. But as far as I know, I'm the only person doing games that kind of cover a whole program of research skills training, if you like. But I've also found loads more games that are about specific aspects of research or what I like to call research adjacent topics, things like publishing or copyright or, you know, digital curation. So I'm going to share some of my favorites with you. All right, How to Fail Your Research Degree, first of all then. So this is a tabletop game currently, but more on that later. You can, if you're in Glasgow, you can ask me to borrow one of my 4 copies. I can also create an online link to a demo digital version for you to try out. Please don't play that with students. It's a demo version, it's not really good enough to be played with students. You can also have this game for free if you're willing to cut the cards out yourself, or you can pay to have it printed on demand. All of the details of that are at this link. So I'll just play you another short video.
Are you a student? Postgrad? Doing research? Great, then this game is for you. Let's play How to Fail Your Research Degree. Aim of the game, to join up as many thesis tiles as you can in the final round. To do this, you'll build a fictional research project, but watch out, you'll find your life has become unusually busy and calamitous. Start with your project plan. What do you think of your plan? Good, you'll need that later. And from now on, you're playing against the clock. Your contextual research looks good. It's time for... Events can destroy your research. Events can usually be negated or reduced if you've done the right activities. If you haven't, you'll have to remove some tiles.
So that's just a kind of, that's just a sense of the game. And what I hope comes across from the video is that the game was designed very much with emotional design as part of the game design. So yes, I have my learning outcomes from this game, and I carefully designed all the content around my 4 main learning outcomes that you can see on under the graph here. But the sort of effective side of game-based learning was really a high priority for me when I first designed this game. And I would say it's definitely, as the survey that I showed you before confirmed, it's definitely a big part of why game-based learning is attractive to students and to tutors. Why it can be memorable. It's this idea of the psychology of it, the emotional kind of heightened emotions leading to potentially, but not necessarily, better learning and potentially better retention of that knowledge later. Again, I've got a whole paper about this game and how it works and where it didn't work so well, but the top line headline is, yes, it really does work quite well. The survey that I did shows that there's a very high agreement that the game achieves its 4 main learning outcomes. And I also looked at the emotional side as well in this paper that's linked on screen there. So very high success in all 4 learning outcomes and very similar kind of levels of success for the motivational aspect of the game. Okay, something not by me, Smudge Skittle. This is a very nice, again, is it a game? Is it, it's more of a learning tool perhaps than a game. You can get it online, there's a link in a sec. It's really about creative practice and how to sort of provoke thought when you're doing the brainstorming part of creative research. And there's just a website, you can go to it, play it for free. It's very nice if you or your students are doing any kind of creative research, or if you're looking for a more creative take on a project that perhaps something you've got stuck on. So have a look at Smudge Skittle. It's a lot of fun. This one's a bit more bit more on the nose. It's Goblin Threat. It's from a university in the States, and it's about plagiarism and academic integrity. Again, you can play this online just in a browser window. So you have to, it's pretty simple game. You sort of find little goblins and answer questions about what is plagiarism. And some of them are harder questions than others. It's quite a light touch, quite an introductory level introduction for students about plagiarism, but it is maybe a way to make quite a scary topic a bit more accessible to students, because they tend to just freeze up when you start talking about plagiarism. So it's maybe a way to let them explore it in their own time and to kind of get a more nuanced understanding. Info dumps. There's quite a few games in UK HE by various scholars that talk about this idea of critically evaluating your sources. So the librarians are quite active in terms of game-based learning. So there's this one, Info Dumps, but there's another one on the Aldin HD. That's the Association for Learning Development in HE, if you're not familiar with it, website. So there's source top trumps, and then there's this one, Info Dumps. And it's kind of like, you can see hopefully on the card, it just rates each source type, but with a percentage based on how easily discoverable is it, how hard it is to know if this academic book is good for you or not. And again, the idea here is to provoke a discussion between students as they, oh, why is my magazine article not as good as your journal article, that kind of thing. So have a look at that. And then this one's a particular favorite of mine. I really like it in terms of well, I like it for two main reasons. I call it a research adjacent game because it's about fake news. It's not actually about doing research, but it helps to develop these critical thinking faculties that are so important for when, especially in postgrad research. So you can play this online. There's the link. And there's also an alternative, again, at the same resource library that I linked to before, which is just critical thinking card games. The other reason why I like Bad News is as an example of dark play, which is a really interesting game-based learning technique where you play as the thing you don't want to happen. So in this game, you are trying to get your misinformation out into the world and you're trying to trick people. And by playing that role, and by your agency and all your effort being focused on doing a bad thing, it actually kind of really helps you to understand why and how people are doing it to you, and to kind of raise that critical awareness of misinformation online. So I really like that one. And I think it's a particularly important topic these days as well. All right, so this slide just has the links and a couple of extra examples. I've categorized these as games that you can just give to your students and they can go play them by themselves. So there's some links there. This one, maybe not so much. This one, the Subtle Research Methods game, I think it's a really great game. And I've been trying for years to contact the people that made it because it was at Manchester Met. It disappeared off their website. As far as I know, I'm the only person who still has this game. So ask me for a copy of it or ask me to set you up a demo link if you want to try it. It's much more about epistemology matching with methodology matching with methods, and what are all these different kinds of methods. But it is I use it a lot on my course. It's a very nice game. And if anyone knows Eleanor Hanan or Charles Neame that made it, please ask them to get in touch with me. There's also this really good one here, the Data Horror Escape Room, which is about digital curation. And it's a really nice example of a good learning tool. It's a digital escape room that you can just do in a browser. Other special mentions go to the Lumosity app. This is really something that I came across it when I was researching what good apps for people with ADHD are. It's the best of a very, very expensive bunch of apps, and the free version's actually really good. So if you've got any students with ADHD, or if you have it yourself, have a look at the Lumosity app. It's quite good for kind of focusing on your working memory and task switching. And then an honourable mention to the neurodiversity cards. I don't know if you can still get them online, but they're a tool set, really, not a game, of both the advantages of neurodivergence, but also the challenges faced by neurodivergent staff and students. I have 2 packets, so I can loan them out again if you're in Glasgow. But I can also ask Andy if he's ever going to produce any more. Okay, these ones then on this slide, these are really games that you would want to run yourself in a classroom situation. They're not for giving to students to play by themselves. Collaborative matching card game for critical thinking and visual learning. I can't really remember anything particular to say about that one, but I've obviously linked it here because I think it's a really good one. There's the Research Dilemma game, which is actually an app, and it was a big European project, and it talks about things like it's much more, I think it's probably better for PhD and early career researchers. It says things like, you notice your supervisor has quoted your work without citing you. What do you do? It's these kind of interpersonal, difficult, quite nuanced dilemmas that can appear when you're when you're doing research. If you're more into induction, there's a nice tabletop game called University World, and again, I can loan you one copy of that, or my game, How to Fail Your Research Degree. Right, almost exactly bang on time. So conclusions. and what next? So my conclusion is, and you may agree or disagree with me, that game-based learning has very significant potential for delivering research skills training. I've looked at the impact on the actual learning. I've looked at the affective or the emotional considerations, including student well-being, and that's quite an important one, actually, especially at the beginning of courses or at kind of stress points in courses. And the impact that GBL can also have on collaboration or on developing healthy and fruitful research communities. There is no magic bullet. It should be offered as a complement, not a replacement for non-game-based teaching methods. And there are an increasing number of options that you can now choose from. I'm hoping to produce a comprehensive review of all of the game-based approaches to research skills, but I've been working on it for about 4 years, so don't hold your breath. But I really feel that it might be coming up in 2025. And of course, a lot of these games and a lot of my background research owes a lot to George Bray and Valerie McCutcheon's research support games list, which is the first link there. Have a look at it. It's got lots and lots of different options about lots and lots of different quite specific topics like copyright or publish or perish or open access, you know, that kind of thing. I also run 2 communities on Blue Sky. So if you are a Blue Sky user, we don't go to the other place. Well, I don't go to the other place anymore. There are 2 feeds there. If you search for me or you search for game-based learning, you'll probably find them, but the links are there. And then finally, just to say, it's not all roses and kittens, you know, barriers exist. We are busy people. Game-based learning is hard to do well. So there are lots of time, resource, and confidence barriers that we need to surmount if we're going to make this work. Ta-da! Huh. Right, discussion and questions, please. I want to hear what everybody has to say.
Thank you so much, Daisy. That was excellent. If you want, you can unshare your screen right now so we can maybe see people who also want maybe to come on camera and ask questions. As always, you can ask questions in the chat or you can ask questions on camera, absolutely up to you. And yeah, I'm just going to open the floor for questions. Who wants to go first? So, is this a question or just a comment? I'm just trying to, I think that's a comment in the chat. Jamie.
Find my mute button there. Hi Daisy, thanks for the talk. That was really interesting. I wanted to ask, a lot of the games that you showed were kind of like they seemed to me like single player games. And for me, the importance of these type of kind of board games and stuff is maybe the ability to kind of inspire discussion. So I'm wondering if there's any kind of in the literature, if there's any comparison between these single player type games and like more multiplayer games where you're playing with other people and can be done in groups.
What a great question. Yeah. Is there a comparison between them in the literature? Nothing is leaping to mind. I have a couple of papers about vicarious learning. I'm with you. My position is that physicality, laughing across a table, seeing what went wrong with somebody else and going, phew, that didn't go wrong with me. All of that stuff is embedded in my How to Fail Your Research Degree game. And I've got a paper where I talk about which game mechanics support dialogic learning, as opposed to this kind of single player on a browser mode, which a lot of the games are. It is, well, when I wrote the paper in 2020, it was a gap in the literature. It may have been filled since. I can't personally think of anything. But what I'll do is I'll drop my publications list in the chat, and then the paper's called something like, oh, I can't remember what the exact title is. It's called something like Beyond Vicarious Learning. Yes, that's it. Beyond Vicarious Learning, how games design can encourage dialogue or something like that. So I'll drop that there for you. And some of my links, some of my citations in that might lead you to the kind of more systematic comparisons that you're looking for. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on with the question of digital versus analog, and I have a lot more to say about that, but to let the questions happen organically, I will shut up.
Fine. Thanks for that. We have another question. Steve, do you have a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Whether it's sensible or not, that's another question. So what I want to ask you is, does this game-based learning approach, at least as you talked about today, fail to relate to the habits and learning skills learners already have? Because on the whole, research skills come after a lot of undergraduate skills. And the one thing that I think is most salient about higher education is how much better students get at learning during that time. So then to switch to a new method, you have to have a view, I think, on what you're asking people to throw away.
Interesting. So what I'd say in response to that, and hello again, Steve, I haven't seen you for years. Very nice to see you here. What I'd say in response to that is I don't think that the method does change, because you design games for learning based on the learning mechanics. The game is just a way of delivering the learning mechanics that you want to happen. So you identify, do I want students to have dialogue with each other on this? Or do I want them to drill and practice, to memorize something? So the actual learning method is the same. It's delivered through a game mechanic that supports the behavior that would be happening whether or not you were doing a game. So I think if it's a brand new method, I think you would be right. And if you just design a game without linking it properly to the learning outcomes, then yeah, that would be a major risk. I mean, adults can learn too, you can teach us new tricks all the time. So I'm not saying it's always a bad idea, but I think the premise of your question is that you're suggesting that the learning is changing, and I'm suggesting that that would be a bad game if you're expecting the learning to change. And my focus in research and design is on ensuring that the game serves the learning outcomes, not the other way around. I don't
Sounds
know
like a devastating answer to me.
Sorry.
Sounds like a devastating answer to my question, yes.
Thank you. We have another, I think it's again a question from Julian in the chat. If you came across reacting to the past as an active learning pedagogy of role-playing games designed for higher education.
Yeah, I have come across that. My research, I am a role player myself, but my research, I haven't actually done anything on role-playing games. They're increasingly popular in American high schools, actually, slightly surprisingly, given some of the resistance to Dungeons and Dragons when it first came out. But in terms of well-being and engaging the hard to reach or the hardly reached, I think is a better phrase, isn't it? Students. A lot of American high school educators are turning to role-playing. In the Playful Learning Association, there are people who are more specialist on that as well. I would say role-playing as a mechanic tends to more be about, it's popular in medicine and nursing, anywhere that already has problem-based learning. Role-playing games are quite a good fit and are kind of increasing in popularity. But student support, well-being, sense of belonging, all that kind of pastoral care stuff that is increasingly enmeshed with our teaching, that's where they tend to raise their heads, I think, but maybe you know more than I do, Julian.
Yeah, I think one of my colleagues this year, she used role-playing for psychometrics teaching, so in her class. And she said it was a big hit, so students were very engaged with this, and she used it to demonstrate, obviously, a couple of concepts that she intended to teach later on as well. So that seemed to have worked really well. I think I have maybe two questions. One question I have is that, when I hear something like game-based learning, I'm also a board gamer, so it's just like, yeah, how can I do this now? How can I use this and implement this myself in my teaching? But I wonder whether it's important to maybe step back first and think about the purpose of it, right? So do you have kind of a roadmap for someone who would like to dip their toes into something like that, but in a way that it's still meaningful and purposeful? Kind of a roadmap on how to start implementing game-based approaches in their teaching?
Yeah, well, it's it's quite a difficult question to answer. I have a very detailed, very rigorous roadmap of how you design a game, start to finish, starting with the instructional design, moving through the game mechanics, and then kind of it leaves you at the point that you actually put the content in and make the game. But it's about that mechanics mapping process. I will post a link to it in the chat. Please use it. Please tell me what's wrong with it. I would love to hear how it can be better. In terms of, but that's not for the faint-hearted. So in terms of dipping a toe in, I would suggest having a look at again, the Playful Learning Association. You could look back at some of the things in the conferences that have been discussed. But what I would say is start with something that's already familiar to you, where you don't need to design a game, because designing a game is hard and time consuming. And if you don't know it's going to work, don't do it. But you might want to start with collage. Like there's a lady, what she calls Suzanne Faulkner at Strathclyde, who does the bones of the hand with vegetables. So she gets asparagus and lays, and peas for the little knuckle joints and things. And it's playful, it's memorable, and it requires no additional skills from either you or your students. And that, because it's about the physicality of it, the laying out of the asparagus helps with retention. So think of an easy playful learning activity that matches your learning behavior, that matches your learning outcome, and then give it a try. And that's how I'd say you should start out, with something a bit more playful rather than game-based, because game-based is harder and probably more likely to fail unless you are already an expert at doing it.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I think the other thing I'm thinking about is maybe in the beginning really have a better idea of exactly what you wanted to achieve, right? So what are the intended learning outcomes that you have for specific course or module or activity? And then say, how does any kind of game actually feed into that specifically? Because it was quite interesting what you said, the difference between game-based approaches and gamification, right? So you really want to go into the area of game-based learning, so that it's purposeful. So that's good. And I guess my second question is that you said that the game-based learning approaches seem to be really working well for students on higher levels. And I was wondering whether this is maybe an effect of prior knowledge, right? So students have, like at higher levels, assumably have more prior knowledge that they can use and bring to the game, and then maybe benefit from the game, than maybe students who have, undergrad, first year, second years, who have less prior knowledge yet to actually use that and apply it. Do you think that plays a role, or?
So game-based learning can be very, very good at the shallow level stuff as well, the remember and understand levels. I think I would say it probably more depends on how much of the learning is self-driven, perhaps, rather than it being at the analyze level of Bloom's taxonomy. It's just that it needs to come from the individual. If you're doing anything from apply, analyze, create, those top levels, it needs to come from the student. And I think that's when games learn better, but they're absolutely fine at shallow knowledge as well. They're very good at that in certain situations. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't know, I think, is the answer to that last question.
We have, I think George posted something in the chat. George, do you want to come on camera and ask? Because it's quite long. So do you want to ask on camera maybe? Or do you want to read it out?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, it was just about your question earlier to us, Daisy, about kind of what we thought about the difference was between gamification and games-based learning. And one of the thoughts I had was that gamification feels like it can be a helpful motivator, but it doesn't necessarily actually enhance the learning experience itself. And kind of by that, what I mean is that you might be motivated to spend more time or effort learning something, but it doesn't necessarily enhance the actual quality of the learning experience. Whereas, for example, more of a kind of games-based learning approach might be more likely to, for example, mean that you're going to be retaining the new knowledge better. But I also noted that that wasn't really something that people commented on in one of the slides that you showed us, kind of as one of the benefits.
In the wider literature, George, I think they do, but it's just I'm trying to redress the balance a little bit, because it's always been thought of as it's just for like downloading knowledge into students' brains. So knowledge acquisition has been huge for 20 years at least in game-based learning literature. And I think I possibly overemphasize the other aspects, which is it's like the skill-based learning and the behavioral change, the kind of persuasive aspects, just because they've had less attention in the literature. But what I would say about shallow learning and shallow game mechanics or gamification go quite well together. You know, getting a badge every time I go up a level learning my Chinese, it works a bit. You know, it doesn't make me any better at Chinese, but it does make me, as you say, enjoy the experience a tad more. And perhaps, you know, running away from zombies makes me run a tad faster than I would have done before. So yeah, shallow mechanics suit shallow learning outcomes. But if you want something deeper, like research independence, you need to go beyond knowledge acquisition.
Yeah, thank you.
There's another question in the chat. I've got to answer Vasiliki's question. I've got a paper which I'll just try and quickly copy and paste the title of, which is the one I'd recommend if you're starting out, because it's got a very simple primary school based example, and it maybe answers your question again, Carolina, about how do you dip a toe in it. It's sort of a very hopefully quite understandable introduction to how you start thinking about mapping those things. Just give me a sec, I'm scrolling on another page. Here it is, right. Again, this is at my my publications link above. Whoops, pasted the wrong thing. Right, there you go. Have a look at that.
I think this is fantastic. Well, we got to the end of today's Tile Talk. Thank you so much again, Daisy, for your talk, your presentation, and sharing not only your expertise, but also all the games.
Well, it's mostly Georgia and Valerie's work, to be fair.
Yeah, but all different games, just different games. So, so thank you for that. As always, I will put everything on our Tile Network website alongside the recording. As I said before, this is the final Tile Network meeting for this year, and we will be back in the next academic year. All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.